Humerus is one of the most important bones of the upper limb, being bone of the upper arm. It's a long bone and a paired bone. Since it's a long and paired bone, a medical student for anatomy must understand how to hold the bone in its correct position, anatomical position, and how to determine to which side it belongs. In order to understand both of these aspects of the humerus, one must first uh, study the bony features of humerus. Let's move on to the bony features. Since it's a long bone, it comprises of two ends and a shaft. The upper end further has different parts that include a rounded spherical head. This rounded spherical head is directed upwards, medially, and backwards in order to articulate with the glenoid cavity of the scapula to form the shoulder joint. The line separating the head from rest of the upper end is known as the anatomical neck. Further across the anatomical neck, you can see two rounded elevations. These two elevations, out of which the one more anterior and closer to the head is known as lesser tubercle, and the one away from the anterior aspect located more lateral to the lesser tubercle is, of course, given its size, known as greater tubercle. And it bears three impressions: uppermost, middle, and the lowermost. You can see when holding the bone in the anatomical position, there is a shallow groove running between the two tuberosities. This groove is known as intertubercular sulcus, since it lies between the two tubercles. So it is naturally named as intertubercular sulcus, and also known as bicipital groove or sulcus, since it contains the long head of biceps brachii. Another line that separates the entire upper end from rest of the shaft is known as surgical neck of humerus. It's a very important bony landmark given its clinical significance because it lies in close relation to a very important nerve known as axillary nerve. Let's repeat one more time the bony features of the upper end. Upper end has a rounded spherical head directed medially, upwards and backwards to articulate with the glenoid cavity to form shoulder joint. Head is separated from rest of the upper end with the help of a line known as anatomical neck of the humerus. Further across the anatomical neck, we have two tuberosities. The smaller one, but lying anteriorly, is known as lesser tubercle. And the larger one, lying much more laterally, bearing three impressions, is known as greater tubercle. And in between these two tubercles runs a depression known as intertubercular sulcus or bicipital groove that itself has two margins, a medial margin known as the medial lip, a lateral margin known as the lateral lip, and of course, there is floor of the intertubercular sulcus. The upper end provides attachments to very important rotator cuff muscles. For example, lesser tubercle provides attachment to subscapularis. Here is the lesser tubercle and subscapularis muscle attaches onto it. Then we have greater tubercle bearing three impressions. The uppermost impression provides attachment to the supraspinatus, middle one, infraspinatus, and the lowest one, teres minor. Bicipital groove itself provides attachment to three very important muscles. On the medial lip is attached the teres major, on the lateral lip is attached the pectoralis major, and the floor provides attachment to the latissimus dorsi. A very important point to be noted that the contents of the bicipital groove are often asked in the examination, either as part of viva or as part of written examination, particularly in the MCQs. So a medical student must know what are the contents or what structures pass through the bicipital or intertubercular groove. These include ascending branch of anterior circumflex humeral artery, which is a branch of axillary artery itself, and the long head of biceps brachii, enclosed in its own synovial sheath. Here is another diagram showing the attachments on the upper end, particularly the attachments of supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor on the upper, middle, and lower impressions on the greater tubercle of humerus. Now the shaft has 3 borders and 3 surfaces. The borders include a medial border that runs above, becoming continuous or as part of medial lip of the bicipital groove, running down and becoming continuous with the sharp supracondylar ridge of the lower end, called the medial supracondylar ridge. Then we have a lateral border that above is almost starting from below the upper end, more inclined towards posteriorly, running down, becoming more sharper, and again becomes continuous with the lateral supracondylar ridge of the lower end. The anterior border superiorly is continuous with the lateral lip of the bicipital groove, becoming more rounded and visible in the lower middle part of the shaft. Because of the presence of these 3 borders, the shaft has 3 surfaces. The one between the anterior border and the medial border is called the anteromedial surface. The one between the anterior and lateral border is called anterolateral. And between the medial and the anterior lateral border lies posteriorly the posterior surface. The anteromedial surface, in almost at the junction of the upper third and the middle third, bears a roughened impression for the attachment of coracobrachialis muscle. The anterolateral surface bears a V-shaped deltoid tuberosity onto which the same named muscle attaches. Behind the deltoid tuberosity runs the radial or the spiral groove, which starts more posteriorly, runs downward and anteriorly, traversing the lateral border and ending just under and below the deltoid tuberosity. The posterior surface provides attachment to the triceps brachii muscles, 2 heads, the lateral head and a medial head. However, the brachialis muscle is arising from the majority parts of the anteromedial and the anterolateral surfaces. In this diagram, you can see the posterior view of the humerus, in which showing is the radial groove, and above the radial groove is attachment for the lateral head of the triceps, and below the radial groove, we have attachment for the medial head of triceps. In this diagram, you can see the attachment for the coracobrachialis as well as deltoid muscle and majority part of the anteromedial and anterolateral surfaces providing attachment to brachialis muscle. The lower end of humerus is in the form of a single condyle bearing two epicondyles, the medial one being the most prominent and lateral one is smaller and less visible. Starting from lateral to medial, we have a lateral epicondyle. Above it, we have a lateral supracondylar ridge, which is a sharp margin going above to be continuous with the lateral border of the shaft of humerus. Next to it, we have a rounded capitulum, this one, which is meant to articulate with the rounded head of the radius. Next to it, we have a trochlea to articulate with the trochlear notch of the ulna to form elbow joint. And medial most, we have the medial epicondyle, which is of course above it, is continuous with the, again, a sharp ridge-like margin called the medial supracondylar ridge, which is continuous above with the medial border of the shaft of humerus. Above the trochlea, we have a capitulum and trochlea, we have two fossae. Above the capitulum, we have a radial fossa, and above the trochlea, we have a coronoid fossa to accommodate the respective parts of the radius and ulna during the movements of elbow joint. If we look on the dorsal aspect of the condyle of humerus, we have a single fossa, larger fossa, known as olecranon fossa, again to accommodate the same named process of the ulna during the movements of elbow joint. As far as the attachments for the lower end are concerned, the medial supracondylar ridge provides attachment to a very important muscle of the anterior compartment of the forearm called pronator teres. The lateral supracondylar ridge provides attachment to two important muscles of the lateral compartment of the forearm called brachioidealis above, and below it we have the supra extensor carpi radialis longus muscle. Then the lateral epicondyle provides attachment to the common extensor origin and posteriorly to a muscle of which is a shared muscle called enconius, and it is a common muscle of posterior compartment of upper arm and posterior compartment of forearm. The medial epicondyle provides attachment to the common flexor origin. Here's a picture showing attachment on the supracondylar ridges as well as on the epicondyles. On the lateral supracondylar ridge, you can see above we have brachioidealis, and below it we have extensor carpi radialis longus. On the lateral epicondyle, we have common extensor region. Similarly, on the medial epicondyle, we have common flexor region, and above it, on the medial supracondylar ridge, we have pronator teres. In this diagram, you can see the posterior view of the lower end of the humerus, where we can see the attachment of enconius on the dorsal aspect of the lateral epicondyle. Very important point to be noted regarding the humerus is that there are many nerves that lie in close relation to the humerus. That is, they lie in close association with its bony features. For example, surgical neck is in close association with the axillary nerve. The radial groove bears the radial nerve. Medial epicondyle behind it passes the ulnar nerve, and above the condyle, near the anterior border, lies closely the medial nerve. A medical student must know about these nerves, because if either of the parts, bony parts of the humerus, they get damaged, the nerve lying in close association with those particular parts are prone to the injury, hence leading to presence or manifestation of different signs and symptoms regarding which nerve is damaged.